Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Smitherman with Metric Insights. I also have Maris Moscovici with me, our founder and CEO. Hi Maris.
Hello Mike.
So today we're going to be covering the topic of how to avoid common pitfalls in delivering data governance in your organization. And Marius is going to sort of tee up the discussion with some points that we think are sort of best practices in this area. And then I'm going to be taking us into sort of Metric Insights platform to show you some examples around how you might achieve some of these things in practice. And we'll round this up and leave some time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type them into the question window in BrightTalk, and we'll get to those at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marius, and we'll get going.
Thank you, Mike. So on the 25th of March of this year, the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal. Took 6 days to unstick it, left 300 ships stranded, and over $1 billion of economic impact occurred. Now, I'm sure you've heard about this story because really in the span of about a day, that ship went from completely not being known by anyone to the point where almost everyone on the planet had heard about it. But I bet that when you heard about this story, you didn't realize that this is in fact an apt analogy for what's happening with your data governance data today. Let me explain. If you think about the data governance information that you have, that's a critical piece of information in the enterprise, is containers on that ship. And then you can see how those containers are not really getting to the right audience. So for instance, you might have business term glossary that you've developed internally. A lot of organizations have these, where they go through all the trouble to define what is a customer, how do you define revenue, what are the different key terminology that you need to make sure that people use consistently throughout the enterprise. Well, where is that information? Is it readily accessible at the fingertips of every user when they're using their analytics, where they know which business terms apply to a particular dashboard that they're looking at, how those terms have changed? Or is it locked away in some wiki or some data governance tool where only a few data scientists and analysts are accessing the information? Similarly, what about your enterprise metrics? All enterprises have them, and oftentimes there's an effort to define what are the key KPIs that everyone in the organization should be paying attention to. Senior management oftentimes defines these so that you make sure that you report on them and you monitor them and you align all of your objectives around them. But when it comes to our analytics, does a user of any given dashboard or report in the enterprise, irrespective of tool, are they able to tell which enterprise metrics they're seeing in that particular report? Because if they're not, we're not delivering that information, that definition to that user. If they don't know that, oh, this has churn, well, what kind of churn am I looking at in this report? Is it gross churn or is it net churn? And how is that churn defined? What's the derivation rule for that? If I don't know that information, then that critical enterprise metric data is not getting to me, and I'm making decisions out of context. Similarly with certification. You may go through the effort to certify reports, to say, yeah, I'm going to go through a process to ensure that the data is correct, that it's been vetted, that the right business rules are applied. But unless users can see that information in a consistent way across all the different assets that they're using and know what assets can be trusted, which cannot, and how certification took place, and unless you have a certification process that is tailored to the asset that's in question, then really we're not delivering the goods in that area either. Same goes for governance metadata. So you've got to be able to understand context when you're looking at a dashboard. What's changed in the business rules? What's the history of what's taken place? And so that users can have that context when they're consuming the data. Data quality is another area that is oftentimes, that there's measures perhaps out there, perhaps your ETL tools have data quality checks that check whether the data is loaded, but is that information going all to the people that need to take action? Do users know when something is delayed and they're not looking at the information that's actually current? Or if there's a data quality issue, is it going to the right party so that is it a business issue or a true data quality pipelining issue? And is the right action being taken based on that? And then finally, usage metrics. So if your usage metrics are locked away inside of your BI tools, what good are they? Are they helping you determine where ROI is actually taking place? Are they presented in a way that analysts can actually consume them to be able to figure out what they should work on next, and what users are finding and what they're not finding, and how that should shape the action that should be taken? All that's necessary in order to really deliver the goods around usage metrics. The truth is that in most organizations, the data governance ship is stuck. It's, all that really valuable information is available somewhere, but that information is disconnected fundamentally from the mass set of business users and the audience that could really benefit from it. And it's the purview of only a narrow group of individuals, maybe in the data governance team, maybe a set of analysts, maybe a set of data scientists, but you're not really generating the ROI that you could from that information. So let's talk about some practical things here. What are the things that you can really do to free up that stuck ship, metaphorically, right? How do you get this information that's so valuable into the hands of the users that can take action with it? So first, let's look at business glossary and enterprise metrics. So what do you want there? Well, a user of any dashboard, any report, independent, whether it's Tableau, Power BI, some D3 visualization that a data scientist created, doesn't matter. Whatever that is, they want to be able to know a few things. They want to know what are the key enterprise metrics that are contained in what I'm looking at here, right? So I know what are the definitions for those things. So great, I see that this is sales, but how do we define sales here? Does this include channel sales? Is it all sales? What does this number really mean so I can understand it in context? And then if I look at something and I understand that it has that it relates to a specific enterprise metric, then the next question that I typically want to know is, well, what are the other things that might be out there that also use this metric? Maybe I've got this great analysis that's looking at my sales by channel, but I want to do, is there anything else out there that looks at this by business unit? Are there analyses that look at it maybe in with a different rule that might be applicable? So I need to be able to have quick access to that so that I can use this data governance information to foster data literacy and usage engagement, which is what it's all about. When it comes to governance metadata, it's also critically important. I need to know when I'm looking at a visualization as a regular business user, who owns this data, right? So if I see something that looks a little unusual, or I have a question about this data, I know immediately who I should reach out to contact to answer my question. And I want to have some documentation to understand how this data comes about. Is this coming from the data warehouse? Is it coming from some other store? Is it somebody having loaded up the CSVs into this? Where does this data come from, and how did it change over time? Are there any rules that have been applied to the way this visualization is computed that are different today from what they were a week ago? So I need to be aware of that because I'm looking at this dashboard and the numbers are different. So that needs to be bubbled up for me. And then I want to be able to understand classification of metadata. So I know, well, is this visualization something that has sensitive information? Maybe I'm an executive, but this visualization is restricted, so I should not share it with anyone else with the organization. Or it contains PII data, so I better be careful about downloading any of this because we have to conform to PII data governance policies, right? So all of that context needs to be presented to me with the visualization so that I know how to use that information. It's absolutely no good if that's just something that the data governance team knows about and I don't know about at the point of use with that content. And to know that, I need to understand the lineage for that content. Where does it come from? and the journey that that data has taken to get to the visualization that I'm looking at. Similarly, certification is very important. So, obviously, as a business user, if I'm looking at content, I need to be able to know that this data has been certified by somebody, that this is a good visualization. And oftentimes, to get that certification is not a one-size-fits-all. It requires collaboration and a different process that might take place between different parties within the organization. But the output of that process must be something that generates broadly visible, consistent visibility around certification, who certified it, when it was certified, and how do I know that it can be audited? And there needs to be an automated process that captures changes, because we know that maybe something that was certified today might not be certified tomorrow. A business rule might have changed, somebody might have changed something inside of the data visualization, something might have changed in the underlying data rules that are being applied. And there has to be some process by which things can be reevaluated for certification with the right cadence and frequency. So let's talk about for a moment what I mean by one size does not fit all. You want to be able to align a certification model that is consistent and relevant to the content that you're working with. So let's take an example. Let's say a developer is building a report that looks at website outages that's going to be used by the operations team. Well, in that case, a single step, one-party certification model might make sense, where the developer is simply saying, yes, I'm putting my stamp of approval on this. I am the owner of this. I'm the person who is certifying that the right rules were applied to compute outage times. And so anyone looking at this visualization knows who they can contact if there's questions, and that should be sufficient. But what if you have something that's a little more impactful, a little more critical in nature? Perhaps, as an example, a visualization that shows sales performance by rep and is being used by your sales team to compensate individuals and by the sales reps to decide where they're going to go on a given day in terms of who they pay attention to with their customers, what their outreach is going to be. Well, they're obviously certification should mean a little bit more. And you might need, in addition to the developer, you might need the business ops team to be involved, to take a look and say, yeah, this dashboard actually reflects the latest policies that we have around sales compensation and the way that we've done our territory alignment and all the business practices that we have around sales. And so while the developer is certifying that, yes, I'm using the correct approach, the standardized approach for collecting the data, it's come from the right place, the business owner is saying all the right business practices have been followed, so you can trust that this is in alignment with the way that we want to run our business today. And this can be taken further. If you think of something of the utmost level of criticality, perhaps something that is being reported to your senior management team, perhaps something that is being used for reporting for your financial reports, where your CFO is signing on the dotted line saying that they are liable for accuracy of that data. Well, there you might have a three-party certification process, or even more, where there's a developer who's checking the technical validity of what's been created, a data steward that is validating the fact that data that's being consumed in this has gone through all the proper processing to get to the visualization and that it's accurate, and then business owner that's saying that the right business rules have been applied. And all three of them need to sign off on it to indicate that certification is in fact valid. So here's when you think about certification, as I mentioned before, from a best practices perspective, you need to think about more than just something's gotten certified. You need to ask your question, how do you make sure that you can decertify it? And when you think about decertification, there are two primary vectors to consider. One of them is that sometimes something might trigger decertification from a calendar basis. For example, that might be that financial reporting. At the beginning of every month, we're closing the books, so those financial reports that were certified at the end of the month become decertified because they're showing data that has not yet gone through the certification process. So it gets decertified on the first of the month, and then once the entire close process is completed, the financial reports are recertified. On the 8th of the month, they become certified. That's great. That's all calendar-based automated decertification. It can also be event-based. So, for example, an example of that might be, I've got my Tableau dashboard, it's been certified, but then somebody goes in there and changes that dashboard. Well, they've changed something in the data source, or they changed a rule, or something material has changed. Well, that may no longer comply with the business rules, so it might have to be reevaluated. And then there's a distinction here, of course, where in some cases you may want to decertify things automatically, as in the case of that financial report. But in other cases, in the case of perhaps a Tableau dashboard that's changed, it might need to be decertified through a notifications process. That is, perhaps the owner of that content should be notified that, hey, there's been a change, and then take a look, and the owner can make the determination: is that a material change that requires us to put it back through a certification process, or is it a trivial change? Somebody corrected a typo in a description, in which case recertification is unnecessary. So with that in mind, let's take a look a bit at some examples. I want to show you how this actually can be done in practice. And Mike is going to give you a few examples of this within Metric Insights itself.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So yeah, let me take you into our platform here. Obviously, showing our technology here, but think of this in terms of how you might go about addressing some of the issues that Marius was talking about. So what you're seeing here is the Metric Insights platform, and we're actually in our catalog view, which gives users one place to come and access content within the organization. So what you're seeing here is a bunch of different reports and dashboard and metric tiles from many different data sources and BI tools. But as a user, I can consume this content in one place and have one place to access it, irrespective of the underlying technology that it might exist in. Now, obviously, consuming this content is important, but as we've been talking about up to this point, having the context around this content as well from a governance perspective is equally as important. So if I'm in the Metric Insights catalog and there's a particular asset I'm interested in, such as this Tableau sales analysis dashboard, as a user, I should be able to click on that, and even before getting into the content, see some context around it. So what you're looking at here is a preview of that workbook. We're picking up an image of what the dashboard looked like after it last updated. So I get a visual preview that this is, it is in fact something that I'm interested in. But on the right-hand side as well, I start to get some context and some categorization around this. So it's things like being able to pick up the name, obviously, and the description of the dashboard that you'll see over on the right. It's also being able to see things like when it was last updated. So is this data refreshed and most up to date, and I should be looking at it. It's looking at the classification of the content, and we do this in our platform through this concept of sort of custom metadata fields, where you can define sort of the data sensitivity or whether it contains PII data, which again, as Marius said, might inform how I go about using this content. And even things like the engagement with the content. So is this a dashboard that I've stumbled across that gets used a lot within the organization? If it does, then it's probably going to be useful and start to answer my questions. And then finally, ownership as well, and having different levels of ownership based on the content. The technical owner, the person who created it. If it contains data that requires data stewardship, then who that is, and then ultimately the business owner for this particular report and dashboard, so that there's some accountability of who I can reach out to if I have questions on this. So before I've even accessed it, I've got a lot of context around, yes, this is something that I'm looking for that will help me answer my questions. But if I drill into this content, I can then access that live dashboard. So in this case, I'm looking at a Tableau dashboard in the middle here. It's the live Tableau dashboard. I'm accessing it as my user, but it's embedded within the Metric Insights viewer here so that I have all that context still. So the description, the metadata, the classification that we've been talking about already, and additional things. So Marius mentioned the concept of sort of being able to document content in a consistent way. So if we have release notes or help around a particular dashboard, in a wiki or uploaded as a PDF, I'm able to get access to that as the user. So again, it gives me a lot of help in terms of interpreting the data that I'm looking at. We talked about lineage as well. So the ability to say, okay, I understand that I'm looking at this Tableau dashboard, but in fact, where did that come from, and how does this exist in terms of the rest of the content that I have access to? So being able to show end users lineage. So in this case, I'm seeing that, obviously the sales analysis dashboard here came from our Tableau demo server, but that it's also being used in a number of distributions that are going out to users. So we have a daily sales and marketing email that goes out that contains this particular dashboard. It's also contained in another burst or distribution that's going out. And being able to understand that lineage, so okay, if it's going out in this email, well, what else is going out in this email alongside it? And maybe this is something that I might want to subscribe to receive, because it contains everything I need in one place. And so this lineage diagram now is showing me within this particular distribution, here's all the metrics and dashboards that exist in there and where they're coming from. So again, this may be something that I want to go and click on and subscribe to, because it's going to be helpful in my role. So I have a lot of context around the data that we're publishing through this particular dashboard. I can also see the definitions of the data that exists in here. So Marius talked about the concept of enterprise metrics and enterprise terms that are being used. And up the top here, you'll see some examples of this. So I've got some metrics that are included within the dashboard. Also got some dimensionality to this dashboard. And so what your team needs to be able to do is really provide a governed set of terminology that can be tagged within each dashboard that it applies to. So in this case, I can see that enterprise sales as a metric is something that exists in this dashboard. It's been defined and governed by this set of people within the organization. It has a definition and a description to it, so I understand how it's being calculated. And as well as seeing the context around this, as Marius mentioned this as well, I can see the other content that this metric exists in. So I can see here that I'm looking at sales analysis by different countries and regions here, but what other content does this exist in? And so by clicking on that, I should be able to easily get to all the other pieces of content, all the other dashboards and reports where enterprise sales is being used, and potentially see it by different aspects or slices of the business, product, region, channel, whatever it might be. These are the other dashboards that contain that terminology. And what you're looking at here is the search engine within the Metric Insights catalog, where it's sort of pre-populated in this case, but I can come and search for content in a way that will search across all the metadata and categorization that we've spoken about, see all the dashboards and reports and metrics that are relevant to that particular search term. We also touched on certification of the content. So I can see this content, I can see how it's categorized and the definitions and ideas behind it, but how do I know which of these dashboards and reports have gone through a formal process so that I can fully trust the content behind it and the data behind it? Well, we need to be able to filter out by things that have been certified. So you'll see in our environment, we have this concept of a certification flag. You'll see here I'm filtering out by the certified content. It's got a stamp of approval on it, a green check mark, and ultimately who finally certified that content and when it happened. And so we need to be able to support the different sort of workflows to generate this certification. And for users, that could be as simple as Marius said, as the publisher of the content giving it a stamp of approval. Or as the publisher, I might have to push it into a workflow that sees it go through a number of steps, where essentially I'm asking for approval to make this available to the end users. And so as a publisher of content, I should be able to easily push this into a queue, into a workflow. And as a reviewer of content, I should be able to see my queue. So in this case, here's 3 dashboards that have been submitted for review. I, as a reviewer of this content, would be responsible for looking at it, testing it, making sure it is following our guidelines and governance guidelines, and ultimately say, okay, is this something I'm going to publish? Or do I see an issue with it where I'm going to reject it, give it a reason for that rejection? This would typically then notify the owner who published this, and be able to address the issue and resubmit it for certification. And as an end user, again, I should be able to filter out by what has been certified. We talked about decertification and recertification. As someone responsible for the process of certification as well, I should be automatically notified of any changes that are happening in the certified content that I'm responsible for. And I should be automatically receiving emails like this, where if there's these 2 reports or metrics or dashboards that I'm responsible for, and a change occurs within them, such as the definition or a description, then I need to be notified of that if it's not going to automatically decertify this content, so that I can review it and say, okay, this is something that needs to go through the process again. So if I have a scenario here where our sales analysis dashboard, we just updated the description, well, maybe that's something that's fine and we just leave it as is. But if fundamentally we're changing the structure of the data, in this case, we change the SQL that is populating this particular report, we may want to push that back into the process and make sure that it's being reviewed again and that it's accurate and users can trust it. So let's jump back to the slides and keep going here.
Thank you, Mike. So let's talk about data quality next, because that's obviously a key aspect of governance. And here, we really think about quality in a couple of different ways. Obviously, it's important to know when data is broken, right? If you've gotten the unexpected results, but you also want to know when upstream data collection is delayed. So you don't want, users will define quality both as the fact that I'm looking at numbers that are correct, and also that I'm looking at numbers that are current and accurate, right? If I'm looking at a dashboard and has the correct numbers from yesterday, but I think I'm looking at today's numbers, then obviously that's a problem. Also, there's a little more nuance of data quality, because we know that oftentimes there is some issue that happens, that those issues can be bifurcated into either things that are for analysts to investigate, something wrong with the data, something with data pipelining or the presentation of the data, or perhaps something that business needs to investigate. There's truly a business anomaly, something dropped in the key metric and requires investigation. So distinguishing between those kinds of alerts that should stop the train and keep inaccurate information from being published, and those that are just informational or should require investigation, and getting that to the right party are the critical aspects of getting data quality to work. So, again, you think about this from a perspective for developers. You want to push to them technical anomalies, unusual low volume of data. You were expecting to get 1,000 rows in this table. You actually got 500. There's all of a sudden a change in dimensionality on this key column. Something's going on. That should go to a data engineer to figure out what needs to be done to resolve it. And then there are all KPI alerts. So here you're looking at, well, gee, there's a big dip in our website traffic. Maybe the total number of rows in the table is correct, but we had 10,000 visitors at this time today, and now we've got 3,000. So there, you really need to decide based on the thing that you're measuring where the alert should go. Should it go to an analyst, where that analyst can then add some kind of note on that particular piece of content, and that prevent a panic from happening by explaining what's happening. Oh, there's a dip because we did a product release, or we've changed something in the site and the way that this information is collected, and so this is nothing alarming. Or is it something that the business needs to react to as quickly as possible because it does reflect a true adverse business impact? And so getting that into the right hands with the right mechanism, the urgent stuff coming on via SMS or phone alert tray, the less urgent things going on email, and then ensuring therefore that the things that should stop the presses, that the emergency brake that should stop the train from moving and needs to be resolved before it can get resolved, that those are in fact flagged, is very important.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some examples of what that might look like in your environment. Just come back to the demo here. So we obviously want to be able to automate some of that process and be able to track both sort of the technical data quality issues that Marius referred to, and also track the business metrics as sort of leading indicators of issues. And so, how might that materialize in something like metric insights? Well, we need to be able to track those different types of metrics. And an example might be we set up an analysis that is looking at the number of rows that are getting loaded into that Tableau dashboard that we were looking at earlier. In metric insights, we have this concept of metrics, which over time track indicators like that. So what you're looking at here is a metric that is counting the number of rows in the table that is serving the data set that workbook was based on. When we pull metric data into metric insights, in this case on a daily basis, our engine is essentially analyzing how that metric, how that time series is changing over time. So, we're running a moving average against the data set. We're looking for highs and lows. And ultimately, we're looking for statistical anomalies in here that may be an indication that something unusual has happened. And you can see here that we see a big drop outside of a number of standard deviations of that moving average on the last data load. And again, this is probably a good indication that something has happened in the data, and that actually I want to send an alert out to the technical owner of that dashboard or anywhere where this data is being used to say, hey, red flag here, you probably want to go and look at this and see what's going on before it gets sent out to users or users are given access to that particular piece of content. Now, as well as alerting the analyst of this, we probably want to preempt sort of the communication to the end users as well. And so if a user is logging into the catalog here to look at their content, look at that sales analysis dashboard and other sales content, we probably want to generate an automated message off of that data quality alert, say, hey, looks like we're experiencing issues with our data loads today into the warehouse. Potentially multiple dashboards and reports have been affected by this, so be aware of it. And so as a user now, at least I know there's issues going on. I'm not jumping straight into this and analyzing the data in the way I usually would. And if I drill into a particular dashboard and it's affecting that, again, it should give me that message automatically to say, okay, this is one of those reports that is being affected. There's actions taking place here, and we're trying to solve it. Don't do anything too drastic before 11 o'clock when we'll give you the next update. And those messages might be automated, or they might be something that is manually being maintained by the analysts who are doing the research on the back end here. So IT metrics, or the technical metrics, as a way of looking at quality issues within the data. The other is tracking the sort of business metrics that are feeding these different analytics that we're providing. And so again, rather than just pulling the technical metric out, maybe we want to start tracking some of these business KPIs that are in those sales and marketing dashboards. An example here where we're tracking the sales metric each day by our different dimensionality, in this case, the regions that we're looking at. And again, use this more as a leading indicator when something is happening. So we see, again, a drop off with sales within a particular region. Well, again, we probably want to notify our business owner in this case. So say, hey, we saw a drop in sales in Canada. This is a metric that's being used in this particular Tableau dashboard. Here's a look at the dashboard. I can drill into it, and as the business owner, take a look. Does it look like something that's truly a business issue here that we need to take care of? And as I'm looking at that and I see what's going on and I'm slicing and dicing around, maybe as a business owner, I want to add a comment into this for the end users. So I looked at this, I did some research, I realized that in our online business in Canada, we had an issue with one of our service providers. We had an outage. We did, in fact, lose some sales during that period. But as a now end user accessing this piece of content, again, I will see that context and can look at the data in context of what's going on. Yes, it's a business issue. It's not a data quality issue, but we've confirmed that and we've given a reason behind it. So data quality is key in sort of continuing this idea of giving context around analytics that people are looking at.
Thank you, Mike. So the final piece of that puzzle is the usage metrics, and this really refers to more information that's going to be consumable by the analyst, although in some cases it extends to the business users as well. So this usage analytics obviously has to do with engagement at the beginning and to knowing which dashboards are actually actively used. So when I'm searching, I'm finding the right dashboard, and Mike showed you how that works in the search area. But it extends much deeper into what the analyst is interested in, because as an analyst, I want to know things like, what are the most popular dashboards, and what my users are using, and what are the engagement patterns around that, and what's getting traction and what's losing traction. Is there maybe content out there that I published as an analyst 3 months ago, and it got initially strong reception, but it's drifted off over time. People are not coming back to it. Well, I want to know about that, because maybe I want to go back and reach out to those folks and find out, why is that? Is there something that's not as useful in that dashboard as they originally expected? Or maybe it's only reaching half of the community that I was expecting to reach. Well, that might be something where I need to do some promotion. Maybe send out a newsletter, or let another group know about this and make sure that they're aware of it, because they don't even know that it exists. Or if something has not been used for months and I've tried to promote it and it's not working, and it's not getting me anywhere, well, maybe that content needs to be deprecated. Maybe it's something that was relevant months ago but is no longer relevant, and it needs to declutter the environment. So the point is that if all this usage information, it's present inside your BI tools, but if it's not presented in such a way that you can make it accessible both to the end users when they're looking for content to find the things that are most useful, and to the analysts who's trying to figure out, am I spending my time working on the right things? Which are the content I need to promote? What should be deprecated? Then we're not delivering the goods in that area, right? We're just locking that information inside of a container somewhere, and it's not being used. So Mike will show you how it can be used and applied in these ways.
So this all starts with being able to sort of get an accurate view of usage, right? And I think that the challenge becomes that the content, a report can actually be consumed in many different ways in a lot of cases. And so, an example might be, I could be a user coming into a catalog like Metric Insights and clicking on a report, and sure, I'm using that report. But equally, I might have subscribed to it and receive it in my email. I never actually go into the underlying tool. I could have been alerted to it on my mobile device that something is going on in that particular report, but not actually go in and look at the details. I'm still getting usage out of it. Or I might have bookmarked it in the underlying tool, and that's where I go and consume it every day. And so we need to make sure that we're capturing capturing usage and views of that content wherever that touch point may be occurring. I might have embedded it in another application. And so, Metric Insights, we're obviously doing that. We're making sure we're understanding every touch point that a report has, and we're capturing that at obviously the data source level, but also by different categories of content, by the different user groups, down to individual users within the organization and who's looking at what. And we're able to essentially look at that from a number of perspectives. So obviously at an aggregated level, what is most popular, what's increasing in popularity, but I guess equally as important, what's decreasing in popularity or what's going unused within the organization. At an aggregated level, that's interesting, but it doesn't really paint a picture of what's really going on. I could obviously drill into these numbers and see which users accessed it, but how do I know, for example, for something like this Tableau sales analysis, did I publish this 60 days ago, send out an email to everyone saying, hey, there's this great new dashboard available, go look at it. All 310 users logged in on day one, but they never came back again because it actually didn't solve or answer any of the questions they were looking at. So as well as the aggregated figure, I need to be able to drill in and see usage patterns and usage trends for users or user groups, in larger organizations, and be able to run analysis, such as what you're looking at here, where over time, who is engaging with this piece of content? Are they coming into the middle of this diagram every day, every couple of days, and re-engaging with it? Or did they look at it once, like Mike Smith here, and never come back in again? And by seeing these sort of journeys that users are having with the content, I can get a much better idea of, A, is it useful at all? Did all these users drift to the outside after looking at it once? Or which groups of users are finding this particularly useful, and so that I can focus on them and make sure that I'm iterating and keeping it relevant and answering their questions. So looking at content at a very detailed level, understanding the user journey, also understanding what people are trying to answer. So I briefly showed the search within the Metric Insights platform, but if you have a way of users being able to search for content, understanding what they're searching for and the success of those searches. So are they entering search terms, getting results and clicking on content and engaging with it? Or are they entering search terms where they're not seeing results, or they're getting a set of results, but it doesn't seem to appear that they're interesting because they're not clicking on that? And using this to better classify content, if we think this content exists already, or using it to create new content can help steer the direction of your BI teams. So obviously this is useful from an analyst perspective as we're creating and maintaining content within the environment, but then also using this to automate things like the promotion of content to users. So if I'm a user, and I just came to my other browser here as a different end user, Sam, if as a user, I have access to this catalog, how do I know what's out there, what's being added, unless I come in every day and spend time looking around? Well, we can use that usage data to do things like make recommendations to Sam. So this could be based on, simply new content that was added to the portal this week that he hasn't looked at. Or maybe this is based on the most popular content that was added this week for the groups of users that he belongs to. And so by taking that usage stats, marrying it up with what someone has access to, and either through the catalog or in an email promoting that content, it's something that I can go and look at and see whether it's useful to me. I may end up favoriting it and following it because it's something that is going to be useful to my role. And you can choose to do that based on sort of a very secure set of content. So this may be sort of recommendations based on what I have access to, what Sam has access to, or it may be you've chosen to promote certain content irrespective of sort of the permissions around it. And so in this case, you'll see that I've got some tiles here with a lock on it. Well, this is where I'm promoting content to Sam, but he actually doesn't have the access rights to access it right now. but it may be something that could potentially be interesting to him. So if there's a report here that I see as Sam, the help desk report, this is something that I should be tracking, rather than request someone to create a new report for me, I can see it exists already. And that might be something that I go and request access to, push into a workflow, notify the owner of this that Sam wants access. They can then make the decision around whether to grant that or not, save us creating a duplicative piece of content within the system.
Yeah, so thank you, Mike. So sort of before we go into questions, sort of summing it all up, to get that metaphorical ship unstuck and really deliver the goods around data governance, it's all about really these 6 areas. It's about getting those business term glossary that out of the wikis or the Alation or Calibras or wherever you have them, get that all the way through to the point of where people can consume the information when they're working with the visualizations. Similarly, creating enterprise metrics and assigning those enterprise metrics to those visualizations that they're consuming in a consistent way, with definition, with ownership, and doing it in a way that it creates transparency and visibility and promotes data literacy within the enterprise. It's about having a certification process that is not a one-size-fits-all or just done in the back room somewhere, but it's done in an auditable way where there's visibility and it has the mechanisms and triggers to enable recertification when it's necessary. It's about having the right governance metadata that gives you insight into lineage, into ownership, into things like a PII and data classification that allow you as a business user, when you're looking at content, to have the proper context to know how should I be using this data? How do I need to treat it to ensure that I'm complying with the governance rules that are so important today in the world where privacy of data is critical and sensitivity of data is very important. It's about data quality. Right? It's about making sure that there's transparency and communication to the right person when something has gone off the rails, whether that be a business metric that's gone south or a true data quality issue that's happening in a data pipeline. And finally, it's about usage metrics. It's about enabling not only the wisdom of crowds, of people knowing what content is being used, so that when I search for content, I can benefit from the fact that the particular piece of content is popular or not, and making the choice about what I'm going to look at. But it's also about enabling the business analyst to use that information to make smart decisions about what they're doing with their content and how they're going to govern it going forward. So with that, let's switch over to see what questions we have.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So let's come across. I think we've got quite a few questions coming in here. So let's go up to the top here. So I'd encourage anyone to add questions into the Q&A window, and we'll start going through the list here. If we don't get through them all, then we'll be certain to follow up. Okay, so will we be providing the slides for this program? Yes, we will. So you'll get a follow-up email with this and a link to the recording. Is the lineage capability something that's simply put together by the author of the artifact, or is there programmatic-like features to read connection strings and find dependencies which the author has created? Do you want to take that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a fundamental premise that if your lineage requires somebody to manually set it up, then you've kind of already lost, because that's too much effort. So lineage needs to be automatically derivable, and that's how it works in Metric Insights. We have APIs that connect into all the different BI tools and can read metadata from those tools, and we can also read metadata from databases. And so that allows us to then generate the lineage diagram dynamically from that metadata.
Okay, I'm going to assume you're aware of a platform called Calibra. Yes, we are. Is it technically possible to take an export from a platform like Calibra and then load that content into Metric Insights so that past glossary work doesn't have to be redone?
Yeah, so absolutely, this answer applies to Calibra, to Alation, applies to a number of the open source data catalogs that you have. The philosophy is that we use is we don't want to ever ask our users to have to define something twice. So if something exists in one of those environments, we can pull it out. We're partners with both Alation and Calibra. We have integration so that we can take whether it's glossary information, whether it's extended metadata that you have added to, let's say, Tableau dashboards or tables that you've loaded in that you want to surface up, all that can be brought into Metric Insights so that it can be accessible in the ways that Mike showed you. We can also integrate with a search for those systems so that you can either pull metadata and use Metric Insights search against that data, or link into them for that information. So it can create kind of a seamless experience for those users that want to start with the portal, but then also go directly into the data governance tools like Alation and Calibra.
Yeah, and that might apply to certification as well, right? If you're managing a certification process in those tools, then us sort of managing that green check mark on the tile based on what's happening in the underlying tool, we could push that through as well.
That's right.
And hopefully you've seen that if you are managing stuff in a Calibra or an Alation or a tool like that, or even some manual way, leveraging that and making it available through a UI to the end users, I think just adds benefit to the work that you're putting in those tools, which is often cases a lot of work, right, and a lot of effort.
I think that's a great point, Mike, because these technologies are very powerful, and there's all kinds of AI capabilities within them, and automated classification and things. So there's perfectly good reasons why someone should use those technologies. The point being, as you said, get value out of it by not just keeping it locked away in these texts. Let that information go free to the right audience, so that the business users and the folks that are never going to go to an Alation or Calibra because they're not data governance people, they can still benefit from all that work that goes into capturing that information there.
Yep. Let's see what we've got here. So, can you hide reports that contain sensitive data?
Well, I think you showed that, Mike, where the discoverability, right? I mean, it's the ability to say, first of all, you can make them discoverable. You can get a little fuzzy image where you don't have access to it until you request it, and then it goes through an access request process. That can go through either we can manage that, or it can go through some kind of a help desk type system for access requests, and we can synchronize with it through Active Directory or things of that nature. And then there's also the possibility within Metric Insights itself to restrict certain behavior for sensitive data. So, for example, we can prevent you from downloading the data or printing a report that you're consuming through a portal if it's been flagged with sensitive data, unless you're part of some kind of a privileged group.
Yeah, I think that's the key. So obviously, yes, we could just hide the report away if based on the sensitivity fields that we looked at, or whatever field makes sense in your organization. But there may be different layers to it. So as Marius said, some people may not see it. Some people may see it but not be able to download it. Some people may have full access because they're within a data governance group that is allowed to do that. So yes, we can, but with different levels as well. How are we doing for time? I have a couple more minutes. So challenge I foresee, which applies to the culture of my employer, is that your platform will give your company access to our data and analytics. NDAs can cover that legally, but what controls are in place so that our data would be absolutely protected and only visible to employees at your company? So I think this ultimately comes down to where a tool like Metric Insights is deployed. In our case, we can deploy it anywhere. So you can take our platform and put it on premise behind your firewall. We never actually do have access to your data and your analytics, so it's completely blocked off from the outside world. Some customers will run this in their private cloud. Again, it's effectively locked off away from us. So in the scenario where you mentioned here, where it is critical that your data is staying within your firewall, on your premise, then we wouldn't have access to that. If you did want to give us access, then yes, potentially NDAs, cover us on that. We're never taking the data off your premise, though. We're just accessing it there.
Yeah, in the typical scenario, most scenarios, we don't have access at all. There's no call home feature or anything in the product that would compromise.
So I think we're coming up against the hour here. So if there's any outstanding questions, we will be sure to answer those in our follow-up. Thanks for joining us today. I encourage you to subscribe to our BrightTalk channel here. We're continually adding content and running new events all the time. You can also download some useful sort of best practices and asset guides around this that we'll link to in the follow-up from our website, metricinsights.com. But thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you for joining us.